Okay, so when it comes to our final lesson plan, don't forget to consider the comments and feedback that you've received already on your midterm. Those can be very helpful suggestions about how to improve from the midterm lesson plan to this final lesson plan. You can and should also look at the example or exemplars that have been provided by your instructor on this assignment and on past assignments. Let's remember that we have these reminders from the rubric that are always highlighted in yellow. So especially like on Part D, make sure that you develop 1 or 2 learning goals that are likely to challenge and engage your students. We want those to be high on Bloom's taxonomy, deep on Webb's, and you have reminders of what needs to be included and addressed in that learning goal. Make sure that you identify from your list of 5 or 6 kids, depending on how many are on your list, that you identify which student or students need a modified learning goal, and you develop a modified learning goal, as we talked about in earlier class sessions. When it comes to your essential questions, seek to make those connections to those bigger ideas of the discipline, as well as in local and global issues. In other words, you have to help stir up that interest in why does what we're learning matter in the real world. Also, Part 2 of the assessment plan, several reminders from the rubric. So we want to make sure that we have a clear formative assessment plan, a success criteria for our formative assessment. We want to make sure that we address all of these questions about what we would do as a teacher, and that our success criteria for the formative assessment looks quite a bit like this, where we've got our learning goal, we have different levels of performance, as well as what specific intervention strategies we would use to help support our students in that. Okay, deeper level thinking task. Think of that in terms as a summative assessment for the day or summative activity. And we want to make sure that we provide clear success criteria for that. That looks more like this, where we have clearly what meets the criteria, what does not meet the criteria. Don't forget to make sure that you address accommodation needs for each of the students on your list for your deeper level thinking task, as well as your formative assessment. Okay, for Part 3, we want to make sure that we're planning for student needs and that we're designing the instruction. So you look at the list of your kiddos for secondary or the list of your kiddos for early childhood or elementary, and then you're going to summarize what are the class-wide needs, what are the needs of your English language learners, as well as your students with special needs. And then remember, you will have a chart that has every single one of your students. And as you build your lesson, in that chart, you will have their names, as well as what will likely be their primary struggle with the lesson and how you will accommodate and or support that need throughout. Okay. Also, make sure that you address what students already know and understand in relation to what's being taught, as well as what misconceptions they're likely to have when it comes to vocabulary, concepts, or the topic. And you have a reminder from the rubric to make sure that you make really, really clear that you know the difference between what the standard that came the year before, for example, what it looked like compared to the standard that you're doing right now. What's your key piece? As well as you look closely at it to identify, well, coming into this, what are some things that students are likely to have askew? What misconceptions are they likely to have? And you get down here and you design your teaching and learning strategies, put together your instructional timeline, your materials use and use of technology. Make sure that you address each part completely. So what students will do, this would be as if we can look at the students and see what they're up to. This is where we address where different students will need accommodations and supports in the lesson, as well as what those supports will look like. So as a good rule of thumb, you might consider making sure that every student on your watch list, that their name appears at least 2 times, just as a bare minimum, and address where and how they will be supported. Also make sure you address when and how grouping will be utilized throughout your lesson. All right, in this middle part, boy, this is going to be beefy. This will be very robust because you're going to go through and identify which of these instructional models would be the best fit for your particular learning goal. And that becomes the meat of what you put in the middle of your plan. So let's say that we decide to use direct instruction. That means that we would look at the components of direct instruction. We would make sure that we have all 7 of these key elements as part of our lesson. We would make sure that we explain what we would do before the lesson, how we would make the teacher and students aware of the success criteria. We build in a hook at the beginning of our lesson. We teach in a way that includes multiple sources of input, modeling, as well as checking for understanding. All of these elements will appear somewhere in our lesson. But that's not what we're going to limit ourselves to. We also want to look closely at the rubric and identify what are the other pieces I need to make sure I build in. I need to probably copy and paste this wording down and put it down in the flow of my lesson and make sure that I take time to address the relevance, context, and background needed for the specific lesson. So I'd pull that out and I'd put that into the flow of my lesson plan in the middle column. Also, where I'm going to make interdisciplinary connections with my essential questions, with the activities, with the discussion. Make sure that you address closure in a way that allows students to actively assess the application and understanding of a lesson. In other words, this middle column will be full of the key elements of the instructional model, as well as the key elements of the rubric. Make it detailed enough that a substitute teacher could get up and actually pull off your lesson plan. It's that detailed. Now, when you look at your materials and use of technology, link to and or describe any of the materials that would actually be utilized, but anything that you're actually going to use in the lesson, you do have to develop, be it a warm-up activity, slides and activities that are used to help teach and have students practice new content or skills, as well as technology use. And to receive a full score, if you look at the rubric, it does say that we want to make sure that we've got a variety of appropriate, challenging, and engaging resources. So different types. So not only just using scissors and glue, not only just worksheets, but a variety of different things that we can use. Make sure that you do develop one or two things that show that you're differentiating for the needs of your students. Some of the kids for their formative assessment are doing 6 problems, and maybe you have a kid who's a slower processor, and they require just 3 or 4 of those. You might want to attach to whatever's been differentiated. Now, here's a big one. Make sure that you include multidisciplinary digital tools that connect the students to the content or to local global issues. So, for example, I was just visiting with a student in this class who said, all right, well, we're covering this topic, and I know there's somebody in the community that could help us out. I wonder if I could use technology to connect my class safely with that individual. So we discussed options such as having them FaceTime in, or Zoom in, or maybe even Skype, briefly based on some questions that the students had come up with based on the topic. Or maybe the teacher could get a hold of that individual and pre-record an interview based on the questions that the students have. The students watch that pre-recorded video in class and then come up with new questions they want to send back to them. The idea is connecting the students with something or somebody that's bigger than their classroom, bigger than their school. This could also be opportunities or technology tools that allow them to collaborate with other individuals beyond their classroom. Maybe connect and collaborate with each other outside of class to share their work, evaluate work, or offer suggestions or feedback. But you're looking for ways to help the kids to connect to content, resources, people outside of the classroom using digital tools. And remember, whenever you get stuck for tool ideas, brothers and sisters, you've got that list, the Start Me list of different types of tools that can be used for different things. But you're also welcome to pick your instructor's brains on, what are some tools that we could use to do these types of things. And in addition, don't forget to consider the comments and feedback that you've received already on your midterm. Those can be very helpful suggestions about how to improve from the midterm lesson plan to this final lesson plan. You can and should also look at the example or exemplars that have been provided by your instructor on this assignment and on past assignments